Welcome to the Critical Therapy Antidote Podcast.
Georgie, it's great to see you again. Welcome to the CTA Podcast. From both myself and Christine, we've been so excited for this conversation. It's been, weeks and months in the making now? It feels great to finally be sitting here with you. Georgie, you are a disruptive marketer. You work in the men's advocacy space as well as the female pleasure space as well. Interesting pairing to put together. And, just for myself, so I can, make sure that I understand, what is a disruptive marketer? What is it that, in your view, that you do, that you focus on? And, how is it kind of distinct from maybe just somebody who says they're in marketing?
Love that question. I would say, honestly, it's something I found, and I think it's really just, I love doing marketing, but there's got to be some meaning behind it. And I think kind of being a disruptive marketer is all about finding underrepresented, unpopular, often like contentious spaces you can have massive impact in. But it takes a bit of a leap of faith. But to be honest, I'm just intrigued by it. I mean, I think I'm intrigued by things that people have a knee-jerk reaction to. And so it was kind of natural. I found my way to this space.
And so it's really, it sounds like it's almost like a niche space where you're kind of carving out where there is a need and those who maybe aren't necessarily getting the attention that they need. In what way did you find yourself kind of in that world?
Yeah, it was a bizarre journey. So I started off, as I think so many young women do, I was always the say what you think, have an opinion girl. So for me, going into university, and even college, feminism it's the most natural progression. It's kind of all you get, like in terms of women's advocacy. And when you're a young woman who has a voice and you don't know where to put it, feminism is like a warm, welcoming, it's a girls' club. Once you come in, it's like so reassuring. And I think in some ways initially I found quite a lot of safety in that. And I believed in a lot of the things I was speaking up about. At the end of the day, what I care about is equality. And my understanding of feminism was that that's what that was. If you believe in equality, you're a feminist, which I think is something we've all heard so many times. And I always think it's shocking that it wasn't until I was 23 that I heard the word egalitarian. Blows my mind, because I've spent all this time describing myself as something, and it's actually not what I meant at all. But it's what I knew. So credits feminism. They've done a fantastic job with branding, and it was the most attractive choice. And then throughout that journey, I went from being, I would say, perhaps quite a radical feminist.
When you say radical feminist, can you just describe a little bit more what that looked like? Like, what were some of the things you were doing? How did that play out?
So I would say a radical feminist. I said some of the less nice things that a lot of the feminist ideology kind of hinges on, a lot of stuff about patriarchy, which perhaps to many people doesn't seem very radical. But now how I see the world from such a different position, it does seem very radical. That I spent so much time in my life walking around believing that I had very little agency or control over my own destiny, my own place in life. And I almost felt like I was walking around like a victim in waiting. There was always going to be men who were just waiting to abuse, oppress, take advantage of me. And I feel like I've been set free in so many ways.
You kind of entered this space. You said that it was it almost felt like a natural anchoring point to find yourself in a feminist space initially. And now these days, I know that you do quite a bit of work around men's advocacy. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about that transition and kind of what kind of work you do and how you found your way there?
Absolutely. So I was a social media manager, spent lots of time on Instagram, just engaging with people who I found really interesting, also had different perspectives. And then I landed on a page called TheTinMen. And that was kind of like a really special catalyst for this journey, because all of a sudden I had spent so much time talking about violence against women, that somewhat embarrassingly, I had never taken the time to even consider men. I hadn't thought about it. I think so much of my journey was wrapped up in my own trauma, things I was angry about that one particular man had done to me.
Mhm.
That turned into like projection on the wider group of men. But when I found the TinMen, it blew my mind. I remember I spent hours and hours scrolling, and the TinMen talks a lot about issues like male suicide, male victims of domestic abuse, sexual violence, just the things we don't talk about, the things you would not bring up at a dinner party because everyone in the room, the Bible falls dead just straight
Mhm.
away.
Mhm.
And I messaged him and I was like, I need to get on a call with you. I want to be involved. You've opened my eyes in so many ways. And so from then, it's really just been a journey of working with the TinMen, finding about all these other really amazing organizations in this area doing great work. And because it's actually such a small space, you all connect like quicker than you would
Yeah.
think. You'll talk to one person, you're like, oh, I just had a chat with the person you're talking about last week. And yeah, I think I've enjoyed the fact that there is much more of it's a small, close-knit community, this community, because you have to take a bit of a risk to be here. You're not going to
A
win.
community of men's advocacy.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
community of men's advocacy, it's a bit of a risk to take, and a lot of the people who are not there authentically, they don't make it there because, do you know what I mean? There's no
Yeah.
incentive. You're not going to win friends and points and social currency by being in this space, but the people you meet are so great and they're working so hard. And so I just couldn't leave. I came and I was like, this is so important and no one is talking about this. How could I possibly go back to spending so much time advocating for someone when I am just a small and really not like a significant voice in the feminist movement? I worked on teams of like feminist pages where they would have 20 content creators for free. Everyone's doing everything for free. And there are so many people just eager to give everything they've got. And then you look at the men's advocacy space and it's like tumbleweed.
Mhm.
So for me, it wasn't even conscious. It was just like, this is where I am needed.
Do you have a sense of why that might be? I mean, we're like, did you have any thoughts about why it was so tumbleweed when it came to the men's advocacy and very different from what it was like working with the feminists?
Yeah, I think you are presenting everything that goes against the current mainstream narrative, and I think feminism has done such a good job of sort of having a really clear stance on some really, really central issues to men's advocacy, and they have done an amazing job of making them look less significant, writing them off. You know, when we talk about men who are abused, it's other men doing it. I mean, does that matter?
How do you make sense of that? I mean, I think I've noticed that in kind of feminist rhetoric, particularly now. And this used to be one of the old critiques of feminism, kind of this idea that it's not pro women, but that it's anti-male. And it used to be a critique that I think many feminists really pushed back against and really were at one point in the majority, let's say, like pushing for this sense of equality or even a sense of egalitarianism in their approach. But now it almost seems like it's become, in some ways, at least in the cultural main, this parody of itself. And I'm
Yes.
just kind of wondering where that comes from, because there seems like there's this minimizing or devaluing of men's issues. And if I were to like reach for my own conclusion, I would think it's something along the lines of fear that if you value men's issues, you're devaluing women's issues. But I wonder what your take is on that. Like, where does that cultural motivation come from?
I think part of it is where we are at, and the simple fact that feminism is powerful. To proclaim yourself not to be a feminist is almost in alignment with calling yourself any other horrible thing through history, any other group of people you can think that we all agree, you know, those people are clearly do not have everyone's best interest at heart. That's what I think so many people perceive it to be. So I think a lot of it is maybe, I think some of it's fear. I think
Fair.
there is fear that to speak about men's issues is to take away from women's issues.
Yes. And there's like a betrayal of women. We've got this kind of
Yes.
code, right, as women.
The girl
And
code.
when you step out, the girl code, and when you step outside of that, and that I think sometimes is perceived to be stepping out of your girl code, is to turn over and start supporting men and advocating for what they've gone through.
Yeah. It kind of feels like us and them.
Yes.
And us and them.
I just from my own experience, I would agree with that. That's, I think, where
Yeah.
the us and them kind of clashes.
Which is so interesting because it creates this tribal reality where it's like, I think the last couple of years, ideas like intersectionality have become so popular, and usually intersectionality is wielded in a way where we're talking about different levels of oppression, but no one ever really talks about, or it's rarely spoken about. I don't say no one, because I do know there are people speaking about it, such as yourself, but no one talks about the intersection of like men and women's issues. They're not separate camps from one another. They absolutely intersect and run into each other, and it's not all conflict. I think it seems to me that it's often kind of framed that way. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely I feel like it's always, people don't see the commonality of like men and women live together. Men and women grow up together. They grow up in the same homes. We are all humans. We all behave in human ways because you are a woman. That makes that, we are all interacting with each other. And I think people have become really blind to the fact that when we talk about things like abuse is not gendered. And I'll die on that hill. And I know many people die on the opposite hill. But there's like this insistence to look at things through a gendered lens when it just is not applicable. Like, we talk a lot about like hitting children, how hitting children is one of the most dangerous things you can do because it instills a belief in violence as means of resolving conflict from so young. It doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl, and it doesn't matter if they grow up to be a man or a woman. They will likely abuse in different ways. We know that women tend to focus on more sort of communication. It's more likely to be forms of control that are not physical. But where a man may be more likely to be physical, at the end of the day, it's still abuse. And the way men and women abuse is generally normally a reflector of just how we respond to their abuse and what we expect from them, which is why I think recently you've seen so many cases, probably beyond the US, but especially in the US, I've noticed, of women in positions of care. So we're talking teachers, social
workers.
Social workers.
Yeah, social workers, and they're seriously sexually abusing young boys. And the reason that I believe has become so prolific is because we have perpetuated this myth that women are caring, nurturing, they are always mothers, you trust a woman, the same things that have driven men out of these professions. And we've almost created a blind spot. And now we are seeing that blind spot come to fruition, which is really horrible. So yeah, I think it is this desire to place a gendered lens on things, and this desire we would never do that. We're women. Men abuse. Men are the abusers. Just to alleviate ourselves of any potential
guilt or culpability.
Yeah. And I think a lot, when you mentioned a little bit ago about just, sexual assault towards men, well, we've talked about this too off camera here. I remember I used to teach trauma courses when I was still a professor. And so, we'd get to the section about, abuse and domestic violence and how that impacts, your clients, et cetera. And one of the things that, I without fail every quarter when I get these students and we started talking about men getting sexually assaulted, for example, by a woman, they would completely shut down. Like, how does that even happen? How is that possible that you would actually be able to assault a man as a woman? Because there's a natural physical response that happens, right? That might be out of your control, but that's happening. And so that idea that would happen, well, of course, was it unwanted? Like, was it
Yeah.
unwanted attention or behavior? So I wonder if that sort of shows up in some of the work that you do as
Oh
well.
my goodness, so much. And in you saying that, I can almost picture what's happening in that room, and I bet you there would have been a guy in that room who sat there thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna have to talk to someone about this. Like, something really messed up has happened to me. And there's an organization called We Are Survivors, and they talk about men's experiences with sexual violence in a way that is just like, you so understand the fact that somebody can go through this trauma as a child and they may not even realize until they're a man of their own with their own family. Often I think, having a son can bring up some of those, can bring the trauma up. It can make it
Some dormant
resurface. Yeah. So I think it's so hard for boys. I think so many of them don't realize they've been assaulted because we're telling them, you're a lucky boy, like, look at you. Oh, lucky boy, she's picked you. And I think so many boys and men don't realize they've been assaulted until something in their life happens where someone tells them. Either their body kind of tells them or something happens, but it hasn't been acknowledged so early on because we keep perpetuating this myth that men always want sex. And
Yes.
if a man and woman had sex non-consensually, well, his body says that he wanted to have sex too, right? And obviously we all know now that your body's response is no marker or no measurement of how you actually feel. So I think it's terrifying to think of all young boys and men out there who literally don't know anything wrong has happened to them sometimes, and they're dealing with all these issues and probably, really despising themselves for, like, why can't I pull it together? I'm really struggling to hold this down and this. And there's like a massive gap there, that the knowledge gap of this isn't right and this should never have happened. We've got to fill that. It's a problem.
And it's too bad because I mean that conversation, I mean, that should be something that comes up in my view in something like a sexual education course for young
Yes.
men and for young women, that there is this automatic response of sexual arousal that both men and women can have, but that men can have. That if a man, I've spoken to men who have been in that situation and are trying to reconcile with what happened, trying to make sense of, okay, I was inebriated and something happened, and they don't know where to go. And there's kind of, this is largely anecdotal, but what I've noticed consistently from those conversations is there's nowhere to go. I'm supposed to treat this like I got laid, I had sex, and it's a good thing, like it's a positive. There's almost a pressure to do so, but also there's that tremendous shame that you also see with female sexual assault survivors who don't want to bring things to the fore because they're afraid of all the possible implications, whether it's a social implication or relationship of some sort, or even just how they're going to feel in terms of their own mental health, and that tendency to kind of lock in and lock down and keep it to themselves.
Yeah.
And, with a group like men who historically, I think the common critique of what male culture is men aren't opening up about their feelings. If that
Yeah.
really is the case, shouldn't we be giving some light to this issue so that we know when this is coming up for them, so we can actually invite them into those spaces? Now,
Mhm.
for yourself, I want to kind of go back a little bit because you said there was a time in your life where you really identified with feminism. And for you as a
Yeah.
disruptive marketer, it sounded like one of your focuses is you're noticing, correct me if I'm wrong, the marginalized in community, the people who aren't actually being spoken up for. And you had mentioned some personal experiences that you felt maybe you kind of projected onto that
Yeah.
work. You don't have to go into that if you don't want to, but if it feels like something that might kind of explain a
Yeah.
little bit of how you found yourself in those spaces, because I know we've talked off the air, we talked off of
Yeah,
this,
of
all three
course.
of us have. And so I don't want to load the conversation with something you don't want to
No,
talk about, but
I'm an open book.
can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you found yourself really attracted to that feminist space?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, I was born in England and then I moved to the Bahamas. And in the Bahamas, in so many ways, it's years behind, and you can really see it with certain things in culture. And there is a real issue with um equality, gender equality. You can see it. There's a real issue there, more so than I would say in England or America. it's very different. Caribbean culture has very clear ideas about what a man is and what a woman is. And I think I was really interested in feminism, especially intersectionality, because in the Bahamas, there's also a race element, Bahamian people being exploited generally for years through slavery, through tourism. And so that was something I felt quite passionately about, which really led me into feminism, because I had seen genuine inequality. And also my dad's a second generation immigrant, and he came from a household where the man leads the household and you do as you're told. And there was very much, if ever there was to be use of the word patriarchal and it be very legitimate, I would say it was in that house. And there was definitely elements of that in my house. My dad is a wonderful, very strong man, and I'd like to think I've taken some of that on, but it was quite a lot when I was younger. It was hard, and that definitely threw me into this kind of, not threw me into this path, but it drove me further down that path. Just having seen actual inequality, and I think then I came to see it in places that it was not, perhaps.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
So
go ahead.
starting to kind of almost, I think I'm getting more of a sense of what you meant by projected a little bit. This sense of there was a legitimacy to, when people talk about patriarchy, I always am curious about what they mean, because if I ask somebody for their definition, I get a whole different set of
Yes.
personalized, customized
Mm-hmm.
definitions. And then there's the definitions that we're familiar with historically, things like, for me, historically, patriarchy was the notion that there was a male dominated space and almost an intentional desire to keep it as such. But over the years, it's evolved into something that's more focused on something like an unconscious bias that perpetuates. It's become a systemic conversation, and
Big bad monster.
big bad monster, a little bit like smoke that we're just swinging at, but we can never actually really grasp or hit exactly what we're talking about. But for you, there's the legitimacy of those cultural variables that come in. There are and have been spaces where women are definitely told, hey, we're going to separate you out in this way, and these are your roles, and these are the ways that you must live your life. And that can be extremely pressure filled and stifling, from what I understand. But at the same time, when it comes to the point where it's like you're walking through the garden and you've stumbled on some weeds, and now all you're seeing are weeds, and you're starting to see the entire every part of your experience is, it's not, there's no flowers anymore. It's just, I'm just completely stumbling through the bramble, if you will. That's what I'm hearing you kind of describe here, and I'm wondering what that was like for you.
Totally. I went, I think, from being motivated by seeing genuine inequality and having experiences like, I remember I was quite a grown-up looking little girl, admittedly, but things like being shouted at by 8 guys on a truck when you're like 11, that shapes you in a way.
It shapes you. And you know what? I want to say it's not uncommon for women to have that experience growing up, because I used to be, and not to kind of cut you off because I want to hear more about that, but I used to, if I was walking home from school by myself and there was a group of men, let's say, that were, working on constructing something or whatever, I would just, I would get that feeling, that sick feeling in my stomach. But there was also a feeling of, Christine, this is how it is to be a woman. This is just what you tolerate as a woman. And therefore, what are you going to say about it? Right. So, I mean, I didn't want to cut you off, but just kind of relating that to, I think that's so many women's experiences growing up, and that we're sort of told that this is just what it means and that that's okay in some way.
Yeah, you grow up with that.
And it drives you to that. Yes.
Yeah,
and it drives you to kind of hate, maybe that's my projection, drives you to have this sort of hate toward, the opposite sex, maybe a little bit unwarranted, but from a deep place of experience.
100%. I think it's so interesting hearing you say that, because I've not thought about that memory in a long time. But even when you think about those memories, you have like a deep gut feeling of, oh, that was not nice. And I think, something, I think maybe so much of that kind of the rage that exists in feminism I think so much of that is probably little girls walking home from school who feel really uncomfortable. And I get that. I think, yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, it's hard, right? Because part of healing is you go through this painful thing and you have to stare it in the face, and it's really horrible. And then it's your choice. You
Right.
you can keep sort of delving deeper and deeper, and it's a bottomless pit. If you want to dive deeper and deeper into what happened and why it happened and how you'll never stop it happening again, you can spend the rest of your life doing that. Or
Yes.
you can make life a bit easier for yourself. And I know now that when I go out into the world, I will not always be safe. There will be men who make me feel uncomfortable at times. But you know what? Since I stopped believing in the patriarchy and looking at every man with such cynicism, I enjoy my life more. I enjoy my life more. I'm focused on what is real and in front of me and what's happening. And you know what? I know it's not always safe to, but if a man does have anything to say to me and there's other people around, I know other people are going to look out for me. I've never been in a better position in society to be able to count on other people looking out for me as a woman. And I just feel like my life has changed monumentally since letting go of the idea of the big bad monster who is holding me down, who oppresses me, who, if I don't get the job, if I don't get this, it was the big bad monster and not because I didn't just maybe do an extra night working on my application. I think it gives you back agency. You feel back in control of your life. And honestly, it's one of the best things I've ever done for my mental health.
It's moving away from that narrative and,
Moving
and
away
it
from
kind of
the
Yes.
patriarchy. The patriarchy, I think, it's nasty. It's horrible to wake up in the morning and feel like you're, not only is there a conspiracy against you, but that it infiltrates into the men you love, and like you've got to be suspicious. You can't trust anyone. It's a horrible way to live. And there are so many wonderful men out there who want to help you. They want to see you succeed, and you can go around looking for those weeds that you were talking about, and you'll be so busy looking at your feet that you never even see
Mm,
any of these people who want to support you.
mm.
So yeah, I mean, I think at some point it's got to be a selfish choice. Like, is what you're believing making your life better? Is it true?
Yes.
You know, so that's kind of my journey, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's almost I can imagine and the idea of having this omnipresent force, this force that's kind of around you that you're always going to have to
Yeah,
contend with, in clinical work as therapists, let's just say, when we work with individuals who've gone through stressful life events and they are experiencing kind of this, what we call hypervigilance, or this sense that there is a monster around every corner, that's not something that we're trained to give them a narrative to kind of embellish, if you will. A part of our work is to
yeah,
unpack that and make sense of the contextual factors that led to whatever experience or experiences like led to that response in the first place. Because now it's kind of become this almost this built-in fight or flight response to everything that's
yeah.
going on. And it's our responsibility generally to reduce the impact of the narrative by making sense of the narrative. It sounds like for you, you said it's a deep, dark hole. And I've always kind of gotten this sense with particularly modern feminism, and I wonder what you both think about this, that it is this perpetuation of a deep, dark hole of saying the narrative only gets deeper, the structures and the roots only go further down. Sorry for all the garden metaphors today, but
Yeah.
that's just kind of
No, I love them.
that's just kind of how I'm thinking about it.
It does, and it gets down to the point where to even accept a man opening the door for you, if you're very radicalized, you accept it. And I write your role because I'm sure you've probably seen this. A man opens the door for you, and a woman says, "I can open the door for myself. Stop that." And it's this big dramatic response, right? Because the patriarchy is controlling me, and they're telling me that I can't do it for myself. And I'm seeing you roll your eyes, so tell me
It's
what you're thinking
laughable.
about that.
I
Yes.
mean, oh my God, we are all way too comfortable in our homes. Do you know what? I feel like some of these people need to get outside, touch grass, and just be reminded of what it was like to run from like an apex predator. You know,
Yes.
oh my God, if that's what you're worried about, like life must be great. There are real things this is something I feel so strongly about. I see people all the time, they're pouring their time into this whole post about what it means when a man opens a door for you. I'm like,
Mhm.
there are
Mhm.
little girls who are
Mhm.
currently being mutilated. What if
Mhm.
you took all the time you put into that stupid post and you put it into advocating for women who can really, really benefit? But let's be honest, I think it's almost an art form in that design is different from art because design's about function.
Sure.
Art is quite a narcissistic creative endeavor, I would say, as someone who's a little bit of an artist myself, because it's about you. The only thing you're ever diving into is your experiences and your emotions of you, generally. And feminism is kind of the same. A lot of these
Mhm.
people aren't looking at the big causes.
Mhm.
They're busy breaking down on their Instagram story why the guy who walked past them in the back of their gym video is a misogynist and wants to attack them even though he didn't really look in her direction. I think it's getting very far-fetched. I think is a lot of
Mhm.
it driven by social. And we should all be doing more important things with our time.
Mhm.
It's really interesting because we used to be very cautious about expanding kind of things like harm beyond their reasonable bounds. So, taking something and watering down an issue by saying everything. For instance, if you were to take something like sexual assault and expand kind of what falls under the category of sexual assault to the point that it's something like a passing glance, then we're actually watering down the experience of those who really have experienced sexual assault in a really fundamental and impactful way. And it seems like these cultural advents, like, you brought up social media, have in some ways, really given those who have a desire or maybe a propensity to look for that kind of attention, or maybe even in some cases to look for proof that how they're perceiving the world is actually occurring. It gives them an avenue to do that and to share that worldview with each other. And it makes me wonder, I mean, for you, working with men and talking with men and men's advocacy, uh, is that something that you've seen impact men? Is there something that, do they bring that up with you? Kind of that felt sense of, I almost imagine a wandering eye just floating above even men in that case.
Yeah, do you know what? It's really funny you say that because I've just worked on a post and it's something like, men, what are you scared to talk about due to the backlash?
Mm. Mm. I love
Everything under
that.
the sun, everything
Mhm.
you can imagine, from the classic sort of, I don't want to be cancelled, I won't touch anything on race or gender, to why are we allowed a height category but not weight category? There's a lot.
Mm.
Mhm.
But I tell you
Mhm.
what comes up time and time again is men don't feel they can talk about things like abuse or things like being affected by a lack of sexual fulfillment in a relationship. I think there's a lot of, outside of relationships and in relationships, even asking women out on a date, there's a lot of fear because the internet and all her girls are on her side. You're never going to win.
Right.
And so
Right.
I think when you see, I don't know, do you know Joey Swole?
I don't think so. Maybe.
I might.
He's cool.
Yes.
He's
Oh, yeah.
he's this big gym dude with like these gorgeous thighs. And he's always taking these videos of people who are like, oh my God, the way this guy looked at me. And they've screenshot for like the half a second where he's walking past. And he's like, this is not okay. And he calls him out. And I'm like, I applaud you. I know there's girls getting angry at you for, not supporting her. But there's definitely, to just be a guy in a gym nowadays is, I would not want that position. I feel like if you so much as walk past, or
Mhm.
it gets views. Bad
It gets
news is
views.
views.
Mhm.
So if
Yes.
you go
Mhm.
on with some, long rage baiting story, like that's a surefire way to get views, make money. And I feel like that kind of tells you what's wrong with the whole the whole system. It's like this rage bait and this like calling people out is so heavily incentivized, not just by social, not like social capital, but also people literally make money. Wider the video goes, the more money you bring in. So there's an
Right.
incentive, I think, for taking people at their worst.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting because you'd imagine there wouldn't be content like that if there wasn't some sort of consumer market that you're trying to meet.
Of
And I think
course.
it paints a really interesting commentary just about where we're at in terms of society. And also for men, that same felt sense of the floating smoke monster, kind of just like the monster is there. It really does put something in their potentially in their daily lives that they do have to contend with
Yeah.
that has a potential impact to really do harm for them just for walking by. And certainly there are instances in which, men may be doing something at the gym that otherwise they shouldn't be doing. But then I think we have to remember that I don't think, and I wonder what you think. I don't get the sense it's the majority of men who are doing something that outrageous. It doesn't make sense to me. Just kind of thinking about human interactions, human dynamics. It doesn't make sense. But we're trying to highlight that little sliver of reality.
It's
And
the extreme, the
the
best of
extreme.
TV. TLC did it before TikTok, and now we have TikTok.
But Georgie, just walk us back a little bit because we were talking about you found yourself on the TinMen podcast, which I know you now work on, and
Yeah.
what was that transition like? You're getting exposed to all this information that it sounds like previously you weren't getting exposed to, and having scrolled through the TinMen Instagram and seen the videos that you guys produce. I know there's a lot of topics that even I, as a clinician during my training, I wasn't receiving any of that information. In fact, I think to even hear that information under certain circumstances, because we're talking about, this may upset somebody to mention it, but it's a female dominated sport in mental health.
Yeah.
It's oftentimes there's a felt sense, and there are plenty of people who would want to have this conversation, male or female, in the room. But there's kind of this felt sense of not having that conversation. So in
Yeah.
any case, I'm wondering, as you were kind of starting to slowly gravitate into the men's mental health space, what was happening for you? What did you notice?
Like around me and the response,
Or
or
just for yourself, like that evolution. I'm imagining going from, you're in tribe A, and then you're like delving into tribe B, and then you're like, where is
Yes.
the middle between these two experiences?
do you know what? I'm going to be honest. So much of what I had learned in feminism was about the essence of the message. We can be a bit loose with the numbers, but the essence of the message, we all know it's true. So, if you get the stats a bit wrong here or there, it's like nobody cares, guys. We're all here, just girls supporting girls. Nobody's holding us to this standard of like the stats have got to be right. And then I was introduced to the TinMen. And it was so insightful because just participating
Mm-hmm.
in a post, you see the level of scrutiny is just up here. A single stat's wrong, a single spelling mistake, that's it. The whole post is invalid to so many people, and they will use that to invalidate. So I think when I sort of try to evaluate my views and I'm like, where is the midpoint here? There are obviously elements of feminism where I'm like, that absolutely makes sense, and I'm absolutely on board with you. Love that. But there were so many things that fell apart when I really looked into the numbers. But then I very quickly also saw the manipulation of statistics by massive feminists, leaders of the movement. And that made me really uncomfortable because I felt like this is not, you don't know what's going on. You are willfully trying to hide and deceive people.
Mm.
And you said it's the essence of the message, which really, really captured my attention because, there's something that feels vaguely propagandistic about that notion of just like, it's just get the message across. It's the sentiment. It's the feeling. It's not necessarily whether the facts are actually something we can verify or reconfirm or follow up on. But then as you're moving into the men's space, you're getting all this scrutiny about how efficient and how on point you are with the statistics. I mean, what kind of comments were you receiving initially, or what do you receive?
You get everything you can imagine. So if you do a post on, some of the classics are, we don't need to talk about male domestic abuse victims because it's men abusing men, which actually, when you look at it, gay relationships have like the lowest rates of deviance.
Yes.
That's a load of rubbish.
Yes.
Oh God, I'm trying to think what other little facts and things came up. But essentially what it was was we were all lots of young university age, pretty uninformed girls having a great time. We were like, oh my God, yes, we've had some bad experiences and this feels right and this feels true to us. And it was just that I agreed with the essence of the message,
The
it
essence of the
Yes.
message.
Yes.
and then it really was when I started looking into, I guess, like the darker side of feminism, the things we don't talk about, the erasure of men, that I became so uncomfortable with the way so many of these stats have been manipulated. And I saw a crazy stat recently. What was it? It was talking about how many women have been abused, and it was talking about being kissed while you're asleep, as
Mm-hmm.
in your boyfriend like kissing you on the head or something at night when you're asleep. And that to me, to suggest that is anywhere in the ballpark of sexual violence, makes me uncomfortable.
Yes, and there's
Yes.
that expansion again, right? You just expanded an
Yes.
entire class of behavior
Yeah.
as all being negative, no matter what
But
the context was.
and I think part of it too, though, there is something to this idea of this female bonding that happens when you can kind of hate on men together. So it's sort of like that group, that you were talking about, women having a good time, and you're sitting there and you're chatting about, well, this happened to me and that happened to me. And then there's some level of exaggeration, I think, that happens because you want to fit in. You want to have that connection and be part of that group. There's something about that. And I noticed that in my college years specifically, that was something. We had all these demonstrations and Take Back the Night and all of these kinds of things where it was almost like to be part of the in-group or to be accepted by the in-group, you needed to have a story. You needed to have had some type of story that you can say, well, I was also abused or I was traumatized, and that it became more about that than it did about, women coming together and supporting each other through something that was actually really, painful. It was more about the connecting and the fun. As you said, it's fun to sit there and chit chat about those things.
Yeah. You
And to
get
be
worked up together, don't you?
Yes, but you go into talking about protecting men. And this was the thing that I noticed in those spaces, is that if anybody wanted to stick up for a man and say, well, this guy, though, was a really good guy. Maybe this guy didn't intend to look at you the way that you, think he did.
Yeah.
There was a, Christine, how could you say that? That's how men are. That's
Yeah.
how men are. That's
Don't
it.
betray
I mean,
us.
don't betray us. There's no level of nuance. There's no level of, multifaceted characteristics and personalities and dynamics. It was very black and white. And so I'm just wondering also, as you're transitioning into this work, what that was like with the women. I mean, were you still friends with these women, and they were watching you transition into something else? Did that come, did that happen for you? Did that, where you
Um,
had to kind of then explain, what you were doing now? And
I think, well, it was a mix because at the time I was studying contour fashion at university, which was lingerie design. So as you can guess, we had one boy on the course. And I'll be honest, I have always been really outspoken. I was class rep. Everyone knew if you've got like an issue, you can go to Georgie. She loves getting up there and, saying what's going on and trying to find a solution. So I think I was always very, very outspoken on my Instagram initially about feminism and the patriarchy. And I've always thought it's an incredible sign of maturity, people who can admit they're wrong and change their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I see so many people who struggle to do that. And I just thought, I'm going to really own this. And I was really public about like, hey, I've learned all of these things. They have changed my perspective. Here's the information. Go look for yourself. I'm not telling you what to think, but this is everything I've learned. I sort of wanted to take people on a journey with me. And there definitely was pushback. I definitely got multiple angry DMs like, how could you do this? The classic betrayal. It's like, you've betrayed us. Don't you understand what you're saying? But when you push a little bit more, and I'd be like, but look at the statistics. And you can't just say to me that you don't believe them, because I've given you these very legitimate sources. And I felt like once I pushed past the knee-jerk reaction, and maybe continue to speak with a focus on data and statistics about this, everything went quiet. And there aren't many people now. In fact, I've got a couple of female friends who, when I share things from the TinMen, they will always like and support. And, you know, over girls' nights and glasses of wine, they've come to actually really, really, really appreciate what I do, why it matters, things men and boys are missing out on. But I would not say that I've created a group of noisy advocates alongside me. Certainly not.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a sense of betrayal from some women. But I think as well, I've had so many uncomfortable, you know, horrific experiences with men. It's like, I get you. If you have a knee-jerk reaction to me caring, I understand. But you can't dismiss me because
Yes.
I've also had these experiences. So I hope in time, everyone needs time to heal from these things. Everyone has, you know, their own instant reaction, but I hope in time that other people will benefit from seeing men in the same sort of just human light that we see everyone else.
Yeah, and I hear you bringing the humanity back to it, which for me was always the focus of feminism, at least throughout my life. I think the narrative switch was only in the last decade or so, as far as I
Yeah.
can tell,
Mhm.
where we really switched from. I don't know if you both are familiar with like Valerie Solanas. She was a, you know, again, the caricature of the angry feminist. She wrote
Yes.
the Scum Manifesto, the Society for Cutting Up Men, which is very difficult to get through. It's very painful if you have a sense of compassion and empathy. It's very hard to read through something like that. But as you read it, it almost sounds like the playbook from now of you take this thing. I heard someone recently say that, you know, the notion of patriarchy has become something like masking tape. You can apply it to anything. And
Mhm.
it
So
becomes
good.
this very ideological inframing where, and that was not my thought. I'll have to remember where I heard that from. But it was just, I thought it was really poignant because it really tells you about this inframing that takes place. It's
Yeah.
very circular. It's, you know, it almost feels like you could stub your toe and blame it on patriarchy. But if I wanted to flip the narrative around and come up with a matriarchy theory and put matriarchy in place of patriarchy, change up a couple of the variables a little bit, it wouldn't be that hard to create something of the same kind. And it makes me wonder, because there's a lot of conversation now around men who are feeling disaffected within relationships and feeling disenfranchised in society and stepping away from the possibility of intimate connection, intimate contact. And of course, I'm talking about heterosexual couplings here. But again, I think this comes back to that notion of men's and women's issues. They don't run parallel or apart. They weave together at almost
Yes.
every single significant juncture. And it's kind of confounding that we've allowed this narrative to create what seems like, to me, something that if somebody were to come in to see me might cause a lot of distress. And it sounds like for you it caused a fair bit of distress to see the world, if I'm hearing you right, in
Yeah.
these broad strokes. I mean, just feeling like every corner is a dangerous corner to me. Whether you've had a legitimate experience or not, it seems like it's creating this reference point in the past. This past is prologue. I'm going to experience this scary thing again. And so I have to stay on. I have to be alert. And I just don't see that being a way of life that feels fulfilling. Am I stepping out of my lane here a little bit, or?
No, 100%. It really, I mean, at some point, thinking that something bad is always going to happen becomes paranoia. You are not tethered in reality. And I don't think I was
Yes.
tethered in reality. Yeah, I think it really is losing that belief sets you free.
Losing the belief sets you
I think
free.
just not
That's
always
very powerful. Yeah.
yeah, they're not thinking everybody is out to get you, which really is such a sort of like infantile way to see the world. And I think when we've both spoken about our experiences at university and college, I think it's very symptomatic of, you know, young, passionate, probably very liberal people.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
think you know everything. You're like, right, I'm young, I've got opinions. And I think part of that, like, sort of immaturity is that we so often fall into patterns like, all men are bad. I hate all men.
Yes.
And there's so many of us together reaffirming one another that it sort of festers, you know. And I think I'm all about men's and women's spaces. I think men and women should have their own individual spaces, but I think what so many women worry about happening when you leave a men of group together in, say, a support group, they're scared that they're gonna all get together and become misogynist, they're gonna do something horrible. Well, I think that may have been what has been happening when we've all been getting together and having a chat, and we've all
Yes.
come to hate men. That's horrible.
Yes.
So maybe it's a bit of projection that's
Hmm.
happening here.
Well, it was interesting, and I think speaks kind of to your point, Michael, that these things kind of interweave, because I used to show a video when we would do the men's violence section in my class. I would show a video that was of a support. It was a support group for men. So they actually let a camera in to a support group for men that were discussing all of these issues, and they were men that had been abused. They were heterosexual, they're gay men. I mean, it was a mixture. They didn't separate them by that at all. It was just, if you're a man and you've had this, some abusive experience and you want other men to connect with, and those men, I mean, some of the things you hear from them are the exact same things that you would hear from a woman who was also, assaulted, or a woman that was also, in some way harmed or had experienced DV. They would speak about it in the same terms. I mean, and you start to see, I mean, I was hoping that my class would start to see that this isn't just, this is how men are and this is the way that we expect them to behave, but that men actually have feelings and they actually have experiences, right? That shape who they are, that shape how they see themselves in relationships. I mean, and we interviewed, or they interviewed in this video some of the female partners of some of the men, and they would talk about how intimacy was challenging and difficult, and they had to go very slow with their husbands because these experiences of the sexual abuse from the past was just so, they never dealt with it until now. And now that it's coming out and coming, it's in the open, they were having really difficult times connecting with their female partners, and the men with their male partners too. But you saw a lot of the real juxtaposition there. And it really was just flipping. You could have flipped them and changed the woman to the man and the man to the woman. It would have been the exact same story. And I think that was something that was very powerful for these people to see, and very rare that you get an inside look on something like that.
Yeah.
But the intimacy, the physical intimacy, was problematic for some of these men in their relationships, that they had to go back and kind of rebuild that very slowly. And I thought that was just really fascinating to hear their partners talk about that as well.
Yeah, that's something I think is so often overlooked, is how much I think partners are in a unique position when they're dealing with like a man who's been abused and especially not spoken about it. Partners sort of hold a unique place because they're not your friends who you
Right.
just not want to talk to about that. They're your partner, so they often come to hold quite like an important space in your healing. And I found especially with men, so many of them don't identify with the distress they may be feeling, or they can't, maybe not that they can't, or they do notice something that's wrong, but it's so often the partner that's like, right, we need to get help, we need to do this. And I guess it's often to do with women being more comfortable dealing with mental
Sure.
health and healthcare in general. Yeah, it's really shocking the ways in which especially sexual violence affects men. I think there's so many men who you hear about who spend their life wondering, like, am I gay? Am I attracted to anyone?
Yes.
And I really love this woman, but my body isn't
Yes.
reacting. There's just
Yes.
so many things I think along that journey from like abused boy to man, so
Mhm.
many difficult experiences
Mhm.
that of course it's even harder to talk about. So
Mhm.
Yes.
things that help you get away from that cycle, harder to access because there's all this stigma. It can take one person saying to you, oh, like, you're a lucky guy, and that I've heard from men where
Yes.
literally silence them for like a decade.
You're
That's
a
it.
lucky guy.
That one comment in the
Yeah.
moment that they really needed support has silenced them. And I think it's part of why when we're asking men to speak, we need to be listening. If you ask someone to spill their guts and they're in distress and you do not listen, you have done more harm than if you had just left them.
If you just
You know?
left them.
Yes.
And it's so interesting because it's like, as you were talking, what I couldn't help think about was that there's these so much of our experience now, and maybe it's an advent of the internet and like how we're just getting our information, or perhaps it's always kind of been part of human relationships that when we get information, we are getting so many competing narratives that seem and sound similar, but they're not very, coherent from a logical standpoint. The idea that men don't talk about their feelings, for instance, as an example, well, what that implies is that men have feelings. And then if you stack
Yeah.
on top of that, right? If you believe that an attack on men will get them to talk about their feelings by hurting their feelings, but you're not paying attention to the fact that you're hurting their feelings because you're beating them down in order to get them to talk about their feelings. How are we ever supposed to see progress on that front for men?
Yes.
Particularly when we're
Yes.
talking about a group that,
Yes.
ends their life at 4 times the rate of their counterpart. And that is indicative of something along the lines of not either finding an outlet or not feeling like they have a safe space to discuss their emotions. But when they're experiencing this consistent rejection of their experience, while at the same time, it just seems
Yes.
very counterproductive to me if our goal is to have a functioning and flourishing society, to try and bruise men's egos in order to get them to talk about their feelings,
Yeah.
almost like causing the harm to go have the harm
Kick the
touched
guy while
upon.
he's down, and maybe he will, he will burst open and give you the
Yes.
emotional outpouring that you
An
desire.
emotional pinata is what's coming to mind. I'm like, that is no way to treat any human being. Christine, I saw you're about to say something there.
I was just going to say, interestingly, on that same video that I showed, they interviewed also a man who was in prison, and he was a Black man. I mean, he was, very big, very bulky, tattoos everywhere, and very masculine looking. And he was in prison for murder and all of this. And they talked to him and interview him, and this man just starts to sob. I mean, out of nowhere during this interview, that talks about the violence he experienced growing up. He was raped by another man when he was a child, and and it makes me emotional to think about it. And he just burst into tears. And you're looking at this man and you're thinking, okay, the way he presents himself, and he's in prison for murder, we may
Yeah.
want to there's so much dehumanization, right? And just that automatic reaction that you have looking at this man, and somebody goes in there and just taps the surface gently, doesn't try to reach for anything, doesn't try to get something out of him, but just taps him lightly. And all of a sudden, he is just in this pool of tears talking about how worthless he's felt, his whole life because of this experience. And it sort of led him down this other path. And it was an extreme outcome for him. But it was so powerful because it's not, you don't look at that man and think, and I will speak for myself, I would not look at that man and think he's been abused as a child, necessarily sexually abused. That's not the first thought that would come to my mind. I would say he's had a rough childhood. He probably, had experienced some violence, but I would have never said that he was, the victim of male sexual abuse, which was chronic for him for many years with a family member. I would have never said that in a million years. We just don't think about men in that way. We don't think about them being vulnerable in that way to anybody, whether it's a woman that rapes a man or another man who rapes a man. I don't think we think about that. And this vulnerability really was an amazing kind of moment of humanity to see in this person
It speaks
that didn't
volumes
project it.
it
Yeah,
speaks
go ahead.
it speaks volumes to the human issue in all of this, which is
Yes.
that pain is private until it's not. Whether you're a man or a woman,
Yeah.
we're all. I mean, just as part of the fundamental nature of being a human being, we're all going through something all the time. It may not be something as as notable as a sexual assault, but we're all experiencing something at all times. And this
Sure.
Yeah.
tendency to assume a compassionless stance, and that's not what I'm saying you're taking on at all, Christine, but where men are concerned, Warren Farrell kind of talks about in The Boy Crisis, he discusses the idea of men as we've kind of culturally kind of taken on this sacrificial lens as far as men are concerned. And I think to some degree, we've actually taken that on to a point of sacrificing men, not just in the sense of their lives, but it seems that we've sacrificed their emotional well-being, despite at the same time trying to pillory them for not taking care of their emotional well-being. Again, all these counteracting narratives.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
Georgia, I'm mindful of time, and I want to go
Yes.
back to something. Can you tell us a little bit more? I mean, what's going on over at the TinMen? Tell me a little bit more about your work. Tell me a little bit more about how you balance the women's, pleasure and intimacy space with your work in men's advocacy.
Yeah, so it is it's a little bit crazy, and I'm still sort of working out exactly how I perfect my messaging on the fact that what I do is sort of all the taboo, slightly naughty, get your hands dirty topics. And sometimes they come to clash. There are many passionate feminists in the sex tech space, which, to be fair, is exactly what sex tech needs, because there are a lot of men writing a lot of big directives on products that are in fact for women. But there are lots of people who I think sometimes see my work and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to unfollow her on LinkedIn. But I like to think that I could maybe be a meeting point. I know sometimes I see somebody in male suicide likes one of my posts in the pleasure space, and I'm like, great. And then sometimes I'll see someone from pleasure likes one of my posts in the male suicide area. I think my goal really is communication is the way forward. The more we talk about these things and we claw our way out of the echo chamber, we can all have better, more open discussions. And I guess that really is the commonality between like the sex tech and pleasure space and the male advocacy and like talking about male suicide. I guess that's kind of the crossover. Nobody really wants to talk about these things, and so the fact that I'm able to kind of bring some light and maybe make them a bit more pretty and attractive as topics is kind of a joy.
So, yeah, it sounds like you really have taken on the art of inviting people into it. And where previously I think it's been a disinvitation, just listening to both of you describe even some of the dynamics in groups of women, just this felt sense of it almost felt like pain bonding, almost like we have to bond by
trauma bonding, maybe.
Trauma bonding, yeah.
but dismissing this entire area of human experience for whatever reason, whatever the motivations are. And that is a disinvitation in some sense. There's no allowing for the possibility of exposing yourself. I mean, it very much sounds like groupthink dynamics, but to step out of that group, like it sounds like you have, and to step into that space and learn a little bit more. And, to me, it seems like that's an opportunity to make your heart bigger, not smaller. It's an opportunity to connect with people that in a way that builds your compassion and makes you a more compassionate person. If you can allow people into your world in a way that humanizes them and restructures them, not as a thing, not as a man, not as this group identity that you've projected your own personal experiences on potentially, but as another human being who just, hey man, you've known you've got these people in your life. I mean, I think the same can happen for men on the other side, where if you get enough disaffected men in a group, you can get the same kind of groupthink dynamic where
with
you're
any
getting
group.
with any group. But now we need to move into this space of, how can we get into this space of getting the conversation going again? We're building upon our hearts and we're not shrinking and shriveling away. Georgie, I think we should have this conversation again. I think there's so much more for us to delve into. There's so much nuance, and I just so appreciate, that you were willing to come here and share both your personal experience that gave rise to your feminist journey, and now this other journey in men's advocacy. And we so appreciated having you here for that. There's an important conversation that needs to be happening, and you're a part of that. I don't know that I don't believe it'll be tumbleweeds forever, but that's maybe the optimist in me, because there are people like you who are out there who are saying something about this, creating content about this, and proliferating a really important message that we can have conversations about men's mental health advocacy and it's not some sort of sin, it might actually be a virtue at the end of the day. So thank you so much.
Precisely, and thank you both.
Thank
You are
you.
doing like such important work in this space too. I think it really is. This is a group project.